Welcome to Draft Sickos on the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and podcast feed. I'm your host, Maxwell Baumbach, and this is the show where we discuss everybody from the biggest of names to the deepest of sleepers. I stumbled right out of the gate there. Apologize for that. No Stephen Gillespie this week. He's going to be back with us next week, in which I will be out of town. So it's going to be a little while before me and Stephen are back on the show together, unfortunately. Wanted to just kind of give you guys a heads up. This is going to be a Q&A episode. I am coming off of illness, so if I sound a little off, that's all that is. There may be some pauses because my throat is not great. I may have to blow my nose a few times, so bear with me. But all in all, excited to be talking hoops with all of the sickos. This is a Q&A episode, so if you are listening live, by the way, first off, thank you. Live listenership is starting to peak around this time of year, so we really appreciate all of you guys that tune in. Feel free to send me your questions. I'll do my best to get to as many of them and give them as thoughtful of an answer as possible. So feel free to send in your questions. This is a Q&A episode. The first question I wanted to get to was kind of a really fun, basic question. This one was on Twitter from Tavarius, and the question is just, who is the best bucket getter in this draft class? I thought it was a fun question. Just because it is a fun exercise, a game on the line. Who's your dude that you roll with in this draft class to get up a shot at the very last second? My gut initially was Ace Bailey. And I still think that might ultimately be my answer. So here's the thing with Ace. Ace is 6'10". And what really stands out here is just how comfortable he is taking difficult shots. So one of the things I've been big on from a data standpoint is if you just kind of dig into the numbers on who ends up being a takeover scorer or a very prolific scorer at the NBA level, oftentimes they have a lot of comfortability going to a pull-up jump shot. It's a really difficult thing for guys to suddenly leech onto, or you just don't tend to see guys go from role player to advantage creator at the next level. So guys who are comfortable taking on that big burden and making those tough shots generally are more likely to do that at the next level. So with Ace, we're looking at a guy who's 6'10", who can just kind of shoot over everybody as it is, and has taken 88 dribble jumpers in the half court and 28 pull-up threes in the half court. The percentages on those shots aren't great. 37.5% on those pull-up twos, 28.6% on those pull-up threes. But he is 44.1% on his 59 guarded catch and shoot threes this year. And I hate to just be I test. Cause I know that gets you in trouble. I'm not the biggest, I like data a lot. I love data. But I think his ability to just rise up over guys and knock down shots made him the first player that came to mind. What I thought was interesting though, was I looked at a bunch of guys for this question. I went to their synergy pages and I just sort of how well do they score in the last 4 seconds of the shot clock? And the results across this draft class, not good. Ace has a 25 effective field goal rate in the last 4 seconds of the clock. Javon Small was my maybe Javon Small, deep pull kind of guy. He's still 35.6% on those. Cooper Flagg's at 32 effective field goal. Dylan Harper's at 29.4. Kasparis Yakashonis is at 30.6. And Trey Johnson's at 22.4. So going down the line of who are guys in this class that feel very tough shot maker, the results are not there yet. And I feel that's a big reason that you kind of go by projection and projecting it forward. And with Ace, when I see a guy that's 6'10", that's at least willing to take those shots, I'm a little more willing to buy into the idea of him becoming that. Here's a lot of Trey Johnson in the chat today. Ace Bailey or Trey Johnson. I'm an Ace guy there. I think there's just so much more defensive potential, even if the decision making and shooting consistency is lacking. Dirty the answer asks, is there anything Trey Johnson can do to rise on your board, or do you just not like the archetype? I'll never understand why guys like Trey Johnson get picked apart so thoroughly. Trey Johnson has actually risen up my board. So we just submitted collective boards this weekend. I am going to my Google Sheets to pull that up right now. Obviously can't reveal our consensus ranking on them, but I can reveal mine. I have Trey Johnson up to 9. And I am willing to go higher on him than that. With Trey, I think I'm just really coming around to the idea that he is sort of a, like almost if he like early in the year, I was thinking like he might just make a Buddy Hield level shooter, and he hasn't been that in conference play, but he has been so much better in terms of just his recognition and seeing the floor. I wrote about this in my column last week. Like as the year has progressed, Trey, he still does it sometimes, but there were a lot of plays earlier in the year where he would be dribbling the air out of the ball. Like just it felt like he was kind of playing separately from his team. Where now like there is a lot of stop and survey. There is a lot of forcing a tough mid-range look against two guys when you don't need to do it. But he is far more comfortable just like looking around and seeing what else is on the floor. At one point in the year, I think his assist rate was like below 12 or like below 14. And now it's up to 18.3 in conference play. So as the year has gone on, we've just seen so much more fluidity in Trey Johnson's mental process and how he's reading the game and what the defense is giving him. There's just so much more. I always call it like this simple recognition as far as like, here's a double, here's a quick pass to the next guy, or even just a skip pass instead of stopping to survey every single time he touches the ball. Like Trey has improved wonderfully throughout the year. I think my issue with Trey is still just like there's such a severe defensive tilt to his game. And I feel like of the guys I've overvalued in past years, that's the biggest thing I'm personally trying to course correct on is the guys where like, there's a lot of offensive value. The defensive stuff is lacking and it's like tools based. Like if the guys have physical tools, I'm a little more willing to overlook that with Trey. He's not particularly quick. He's not particularly strong. He's not particularly comfortable with physicality, which is why he rarely gets to the rim. But at the end of the day, he is a 6'6" freshman who is an electric three-point shooter who is increasingly making good decisions. So Trey Johnson is a guy who's risen up for me. I was like really, really slow to buy in on Trey. I've bought into him more and more. And I think there's a path where like I could talk myself into him over some of the guys I have ahead of him still. So Trey Johnson's been a riser for me. I hope that answers the question. I think the reason that he gets picked apart so thoroughly is because I think the floor value of that, like if he doesn't hit a great outcome, guys like that are just easy to get. Like Gary Trent, like on a minimum, you know what I mean? Like Gary Trent's good, but like the fact that he's available on the minimum is just because shootery guys who don't provide much ancillary value and are defensive liabilities are just not something that scales particularly well to playoff basketball. And it's not something that NBA teams have shown a real value for. So I think that's where some of the Trey Johnson skepticism comes from. I'm going to do one more before I take a quick break so I can cough my brains out for a little bit. This next question is from Nathaniel Miller. Do you have any struggle bus. Do you have a feeling many immediate drafts will be surprisingly shallow with many raw players returning to college with hefty NIL bags and low/mid-major players transferring up to prove themselves and sleeper internationals avoiding being stashed with restricting team rights? Yeah, I absolutely do. I think that's like 100% what we're going to see. Is year over year, we're going to see fewer guys come out. We've seen it already in the NIL era. Like that first draft with NIL, I just remember being like, oh my gosh, like my entire second round is gone. I think that's going to be increasingly more common. I think the other part of it is we're seeing a decreased stigma on transferring, where previously I feel like, and it still exists, like 100%. Like I will still talk to people in the league who will be skeptical of players who couldn't make it work one place and then did somewhere else. And a lot of times I think it's actually kind of reasonable. Like if I'm an NBA team, I think it's a good thing to ask, why did this player need a particular context to thrive? Why didn't they work in, certain context? If that context is similar to ours, maybe we're not going to be a good fit. Like, I think that's totally reasonable. So I think it's well-reasoned and worth considering why guys transfer and why they need certain environments to stick. Sometimes I think guys just don't play for that good coaches, or, maybe they're in a team where their role is diminished or they're not getting the type of instruction that they need. Like we just see it year over year where guys even can move up to a more difficult context and find success. Like it's all over the place. Sometimes it's a Brandon Pajemski situation where for whatever reason, they just didn't want to give him the minutes. He moves somewhere and then it pans out. Sometimes it's Kalel Ware, right? Where like Mike Woodson, you'd find a lot of people hard pressed to be like, oh yeah, Mike Woodson gets guys better year over year at the college level. But he gets out of Oregon and gets a big role where he has the minute security to play every single night, and his production looks a whole lot better. I think another interesting one is like Terrace Reed. Like Terrace Reed is a guy who goes from Michigan, where like they're not a great team, and his production is like okay. And then he transfers to UConn. Like Terrace Reed, if you've not been paying attention, by the way, is like destroying dudes right now. He had that huge game against Providence yesterday where he had 24 and 18 with 6 blocks and 2 steals. But he's like one of my favorite spreadsheet guys that a lot of people aren't paying attention to. So Terrace Reed has a 9.7 block rate, best in the Big East. Best rebounding numbers in the Big East, like by far, 17.7 offensive rebound rate, 26.8 defensive rebound rate, steal rate of 2.2, and like a 10.5 assist rate. So like knows how to move the ball a little bit. Very big, very strong, like classic Maxwell kind of guy physically. But like that's a weird one where it's like you wouldn't expect a guy to go from, you know, poor Michigan teams to UConn and suddenly be better. And UConn, I know, has been like iffy this year, but yeah, like I think context is like a real thing, but to go from a 0.4 BPM to a 9.5, like sometimes it is environment. And I would imagine that an NBA team would value the UConn coaching context far more than the one that he played in at Michigan. So really good stuff from Terrace Reed this year. But yeah, I think it is something that we're to see more and more is guys just going back for bags. I get it mostly like talking to I would say like people on the college level, you'll see a lot of like, oh, we're going to lose this guy. Speaking to people at the mid-major level, just kind of preemptively thinking the guys are gone once they reach a certain threshold and never even like considering the context of the league. I think from an NBA standpoint, there's pros and there's cons to it. I think the pros are you're going to get to see guys. It's going to make the draft quote unquote easier in some ways that like if I like a mid-major player, I'm going to get to see them perform in a variety of contexts. So instead of going in blind, I'm like, this guy was good at a mid-major level, but what's it going to look like in the NBA? We're probably going to get step 2, which is how does it look at the high major level? Unless guys overachieve to the point that they can't go straight to the league out of a mid-major context. But yeah, are we going to see shallower and shallower drafts? 100%. Eventually it is going to sort of pile up to the point that like we're just going to have guys that stayed in all 4 years, and then we'll see sort of that tidal wave of like now it is just like seniors and the very best underclassmen, and that's it. I think we're getting closer to that point now with the COVID year being gone after this season, that I think you'll see the depth start to return to classes to a degree, but in general, like there usually only are 20 NBA players in a given class in general, so depth can be sort of a mistress, if you will. It's not a permanent thing. It's something that can sort of lure you in, and it's not always real. There aren't always 40 good players. There might be 40 guys that profile better at the league on paper, but there aren't always that many NBA players in a given class. So I hope that answers it. But yeah, I'm sort of like I think now, instead of wondering why a player transferred, my concern is more like if a guy leaves college too early, I'm just like, who do you think you are? I think for a lot of guys, it's beneficial to stay in school and get those NIL bags. And I love that. Like, I think it's better for the players. I think it's better for the league. The guys can come in more physically ready, more skilled, having played in, a variety of systems in some cases. I think it's really good overall. So we're going to take a quick break. We will be right back on the other side. We're actually going to stay kind of on the mid-major front with our next question. So stay with us. So this next question is one that I quite like. It is from prophecy_prod. It's the ultimate question probably, but I find it fascinating about how you look to project cool players from low mid-major schools, good example being Jackson Money, when their competition is generally practically non-transferable. Love your work, man. So like basically, how do you go about determining who at a low or mid-major level can scale up? The first answer is like going to sound kind of like, well, yeah, duh. But it's how physically different do they look on tape. So like I felt much better putting gaudy expectations onto a guy like Dalton Connect when I did him for No Stone Unturned, because he looked so physically different than the dudes at Northern Colorado. That obviously showed up on paper too. Like if you look at the stat sheet, he was a really high dunk player. And then when I went into the tape, the thing that always stuck with me was how many blow-by dunks he generated in the half court against like fellow prospects, guys like Dylan Jones, Grant Nelson, like those kind of guys. He could just drive right by him and get up in the half court and dunk it. So I think part of it is just very eye testy. It's very like, how do these guys look physically? Do they look different or do they look like a mid-major basketball player? I still think you need to be careful with that. Like I think Neek Clifford is like a kind of a good example. And I say as somebody who loves Neek, like me and Steven plan on talking about Neek like in depth soon. Neek is a top 20 guy for me. When you see Neek on the floor in the Mountain West, he's just like clearly cut above. When you saw him at the NBA Combine last year, like it was a little more difficult for him. But Neek still had really good performances against high major schools. And that is something I always do with guys that I get really into at the mid-major level is look at their games against high major competition and see how they look physically in those games. Another good example of this is Ben Shepherd, where when I did him for No Stone, one of the things that stuck out to me was they had a game his junior year where they played Vanderbilt, and he got the Scottie Pippen Jr. assignment a lot in that game. And I think they held Scottie Pippen Jr. to 10 points. And I remember like looking up Scottie Pippen Jr.'s numbers. And I think that was like one of his lowest scoring outputs that entire year. So I think a lot of it is just like physicality and physical tools and how well they look when they don't play teams that are like them. And then when they are playing teams that look like them, do they look a cut above? That's sort of where I worry about Jackson Money. To his credit, he is produced in games against big teams. The game against Butler, I wrote about it in my column about Moni. He had 3 really crucial stops against Jamil Telfort late in that game. I still worry statistically about some of the stuff on paper with him. So this is where we'll kind of get into the spreadsheet side of it. Mid-major guys who scale up well tend to be like mega dominant. Like they tend to really not leave any room for doubt. I'm going to see if I've still got Conchar on my spreadsheets here. Yep. Okay. So John Conchar, for context, I think if I sort by this, we'll get him closer to the top. So it'll be easy to read. Perfect. Okay. John Conchar graded out like exceptionally well analytically across the board. So he had pretty high usage. He had like a usage rate just under 26 in his pre-draft season. And this is like an NBA role player, right? Like this is not somebody who is dominant in the league by any circumstances. He played Purdue Fort Wayne in the Summit League. Let's see how the Summit League stacked up in 2019. They were ranked the 22nd best conference using the SRS method on College Basketball Reference. So a lower tier league. Conchar in that season had a good usage rate with a 63.2 true shooting percentage. So he was getting buckets very easily. He dominated both from a feel and physicality standpoint. So if you look at his defensive rebounding rate, he had a 20.4 defensive rebound rate. He had a 29.3 assist rate. He had a 2.8 block rate, a 3.1 steal rate. When you're thinking like John Conchar in the NBA, you're not thinking defensive dominance per se. But when he was in college, he was defensively dominant because he was physically a cut above the players in his league, and he was mentally a cut above the players in his league. But just kind of looking at those numbers like really quickly, like that's generally what you're looking for at the mid-major level is guys need to prove themselves like a full cut above. And right on cue, we get asked a question about Bennett Sturts, who is a guy that I like quite a bit from B2B in the chat. BTB in the chat. Bennett Sturts rocks. He is a guard at Drake, 6'4", scoring 18.8 points per game, 6 assists per game, 4.4 rebounds, 2.2 steals. A guy I brought up earlier in the year in one of my columns after he just like shredded a bunch of high major programs in a tournament. On paper, like that's what you're looking for. Like on paper, you were looking for the results that you're getting out of Bennett Sturts, where it's first of all, he plays almost like every minute of every game. He's averaging over 39 minutes per game, which is like hysterical. Like the fact that like they don't even consider taking him off the floor rocks. But good usage rate, 25.4, unreal assist rate, 35.4, really high defensive rebound rate for a guard, 14.1, super efficient, 60.3 true shooting percentage. 3.8 steal rate. So like defensive, again, when you look at Bennett Sturts, you're probably not projecting him to be a defensive force at the NBA level. But the fact that he's a 3.8 steal rate and a 0.9 block rate in his league showcases that, like, yeah, in the league that he's in, he's way above everybody else. Also a guy who gets the line a lot, really good catch and shoot numbers on Bennett Sturts. I think this is a classic, like the question we talked about earlier, like going to be hard to imagine he doesn't look for a mid-major bag, or I'm sorry, a high major bag rather, versus going in the NBA draft. It's going to depend on just where the demand for him is. If he tests the waters, if he just looks on college, who knows? But I think with Bennett Sturts, you're looking at just like a real high quality player there. My dream was that like no one was going to realize this. I'd get it to cover him for no stone this offseason. I think it's pretty clear that ain't happening. My thoughts on him and like why I'd be like a little gun shy with him potentially is just like the high major competition we've seen him against this year isn't awesome. Like he shredded those teams, but it was like Vanderbilt, Kansas State, and Miami. So not exactly like a murderer's row. And I think those were some of his highest turnover games too. So it gets a little like, and like those teams also don't have the best like defensive anchor centers. So like it's hard to know like what to really make of his finishing, I think, to some degree. But all in all, like you want to look at what a mid-major player looks like who sticks in the NBA. It looks like that. It looks like that type of production. So I'm a big Bennett Sturts guy, big believer in him. Let's see what else we got in the chat, because we've got a bunch of questions coming in. How high do you think Neek could rise before you think it's outrageous? If Neek has a good combine, but I don't even think he's gonna have to play in the combine. I don't know. I'm like baffled. So I feel like I'm on another planet with Neek, where like Neek to me again is like so statistically dominant, and like the only knock on him was that he didn't shoot a lot of threes or make a lot of threes, and this year he's like taking really good volume from 3-point range, and he's making almost 38% of his threes on 8.2 per 100 possessions, and he's the top rebounder in the Mountain West, and he's running the offense for his team, and he's got a great assist to turnover ratio, and he's still making plays on defense. I get it. 6'5", 6'8" wingspan. I wish he was bigger, blah, blah, blah. I bet a lot of people wish a lot of things. I think Neek could go lottery, depending on the context, to be completely honest. Like, I don't know what else this guy wants from people, and I just keep seeing mock drafts where he's in the second round, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. I guess that must just be like where NBA demand for him is, allegedly, but like, if you work in the NBA and you think this guy stinks, hit me up, because I'd love to know what you're seeing that I'm not, because I think this dude is awesome, and I am baffled as to his stock. Yeah, very, very into him. Let's see what else we've got in here. Are you high on Fears? I'm assuming that's Jeremiah Fears. Not particularly. We've talked about that a lot on the show. Don't want to dwell too much on that. I just kind of think that he's sort of a score first guard, which is not super interesting to me. I like the handle. I think I'm just lower on him as a playmaker and his overall impact. If you look at Oklahoma in their games against good competition, and the on-offs are not much better with him on the floor than off it. And that to me is just like a huge red flag. So I'm not super interested in Jeremiah Fears as a this year prospect. We are going to do a break. I've got a few more questions that we're going to get to. Keep sending them in the chat because we've got some really fun ones, and I'm here. So send me your questions. I'll try to get them all in. We're going to take one more break. We'll be right back on the other side. All right. This is a really fun question. I absolutely love this one. And of course I just lost it. This one is from Cannibal Serb. Who are your nightmare fits in the lottery? Like, stylistically, who do you see not meshing with the team that could pick them? Bonus points for obvious positional reasons. So I'm going to pull up Tankathon. I think most of mine are like involving the Wizards. Like, if the Wizards fall a little too much and then they draft just like another super offensively tilted guy with some physical concerns that limit them defensively, like if Kasparis or like Khan Knipple, any of the whites end up the non-Cooper flag whites end up on the Wizards, that's one where I'm just like, oh boy, I'm not so sure how I feel about that. Or even like Trey Johnson, again, who is somebody that I love. but it's like, I don't know that we need any more offensively tilted guys in that backcourt who I don't think have like the physical chops to be plus defenders in the NBA. That worries me. Let me see what else we've got. Or like if Orlando took like another one of those shooter guys that doesn't really do anything else, like Liam McNeely, or I mean, McNeely is going to go higher than this, but like one of those kind of guys in Orlando, I think would just be another, like, how many of these are we doing? I think that would be one I wouldn't be crazy about. Yeah, I feel like those are the ones that jump out. It's just like Washington getting worse. I think a lot of that same stuff applies to Charlotte too. Like Charlotte getting another just like super offensively tilted player without positional size, and like just how that projects to their backcourt. I want them to just be like a jumbo team to provide defensive insulation and just see where that goes. This next one is from Sravan, and it is, how can Danny Wolf contribute to an NBA team? What team is his best fit for him, and where do you think he goes? Also, is close to NBA comp. It's hack to say, but I think like Naz Reid is really the guy he reminds me of most. I think there are key differences there. I think Naz is a much more functional, like, downhill driver. Like, he's just so much smoother with the rock and probably quicker downhill. Has level of coordination I feel like I don't always see from Wolf. But I think Wolf is a much more polished passer coming in, playmaker for others, sees the floor better. So I think he's got at least that going for him. The fit I want for him is like, look, if OKC is going to like get one of these picks that ends up being super high just because of like pick protections, I would love him in OKC. Like, I think the idea of like him, Chet, Hartenstein, like some of the stuff they could do, just fitting in that 5-out system would be a really beautiful thing. I also, oh my gosh, this is bad. Just in my head, oh man, I still can't believe this is a thing that happened. In my head, I was just like, oh, him in Dallas with Luka. Whoop. That's a brain fart. Luka Doncic, not on the Dallas Mavericks anymore. Forget about that one. Sorry, Mavericks fans. Yeah, I think that could be a fun one. I also wonder about him in Miami. That's one I think about quite a bit, where like they can continue to get him like right physically, and then him and Kel'el Ware. Imagine him throwing lobs to Kel'el Ware. I think that's really fun. So that's another one that I think about with him quite a bit. In the chat, NBA Jam, how far away is Magoon Guath? Film is very intriguing. I think I'm much more pro Magoon Guath than a lot of people, and I get it. Like, anytime a guy is that skinny, it's scary. I certainly see why people would have reservations, right? Like, he's real thin. I think what I like about Magoon Guath, and why I think I'd probably be quicker to get in on him as far as like a 2026 guy, is I think there's always hope you can get somebody stronger. I don't know that there's hope that you can get another 7-footer to move and block shots like that. He's already an elite shot blocker with a 14.3 block rate. He is a very good shooter for his size with a 37.2 3-point percentage. And I think that his ability to just sort of stay within a team construct makes him much more appealing than a lot of like quote unquote unicorn bigs who try to like go out and get their own buckets at times. We see some of that from him, but I think it's easier in my head to imagine him being like jumbo Chris Boucher, than like something, where he's like putting the ball on the deck or getting too fancy with it. And I think that's like a super effective player. The frame is scary. And like, we see these kind of guys get injured a lot. Can his frame handle the NBA? All very fair questions. I think I'm just a little more inclined to bet on that sort of thing. Because the rarity of guy who is that big and moves like that and can provide floor spacing. Very raw, very, very raw. Needs to fill out the frame, needs to rebound better, needs to make better passing decisions, but a guy that I like a lot. What do you think of Wolf and Wemby? That would be great. I think anybody with Wemby would be pretty great. So yeah, that's definitely one I'd be in on too. Got one. This one was in the DM, so it stays anonymous. How I want your opinion about Joan Beringer for draft Sickos. His mock ranks are inconsistent, but I like him in general and think he can be a late first round guy. Full transparency on him. Of the guys that are like projected first round or close to it, I feel like him and like Micah Peavy is the other guy that like is really like shooting up just because he keeps making shots. Then I need to devote more like with Peavy. I've watched a ton of Georgetown, but it's like I need to watch Peavy specifically instead of Sorber. And I've kind of been taking Georgetown games off my schedule just because Herbert's been hurt. With Beringer, I am like, where I'm struggling with him is I think he's like pretty obviously good in a way that like I get why NBA teams are interested, right? Like the wingspan's going to be really good. He's going to measure with the 7-foot wingspan, very fluid, very bouncy. He's got those wide shoulders too, so I feel like he's going to fill out well, and he's got a really high motor. Really great lob target because he gets up so well. I like his kind of feistiness on the offensive glass, and I also like that he's like willing to take a jump shot here and there. And then defensively, like he's your classic like shot blocker dude. Flies for blocks, really light second jump, can act as a deterrent, and then he's still got those tools where like he can be out in space, moves his feet well on the perimeter. In some of the clips I've seen of him on the perimeter too, I like how he's not one of those bigs that is like trying to reach all the time and then like compromises their balance. Like he knows how to play as a big man on an island and just have discipline and not let guys get where they want and make life difficult for them. Where I like kind of don't get it, I guess I would say with Beringer is I just don't see what like the super high upside is. And it's dicey because I always like preach on this show about how much I like guys that are late bloomers. I don't see the thing that like takes him to the next level. So like what I like about a late bloomer, like a J-Dub, is that like J-Dub had a really great level of passing feel for his size that made him a little bit different. And like even like a less extreme version of that you could say about like late bloomers that I like Ben Shepherd, or a late bloomer I missed on like Jalen Wells, is that they sort of had like this intrinsic feel that as they're sort of making their physical development and growing into their body, there's this sort of mental side of it that dovetails really nicely and sort of allows them to catch up. And like Yaxel Lendeborg, like that's another guy that I'm high on because it's like he's this guy who didn't play very much basketball pre-college, big growth spurt, but also like inexperienced but really great feel. With Beringer, like I'm just not seeing that feel. I also like don't think his hands are awesome. Like I feel like I've seen him fumble a lot of lobs and rebounds. I don't trust him to make decisions with the ball. Like it's really sped up. He sort of lacks polish in that respect. And then like his defense positioning is still erratic, which like he's a young big. I don't really worry about that particularly too much with his archetype. Like you'd say the same thing about like Yves Missi a year ago, and he's fine. I think that's like my thing with him. It's like I see him very much in the Missi mold of like I think I see this. I think it's good. I am yet to be sold on why it's great. And if you're like a Beringer believer, like I'd love to hear what you think I'm missing there. Like I think this is like a really solid archetype. Like this is a player that we know works, and I think that intrinsically has value. Like it's something that we know works in the NBA. I'm just not seeing like a super high ceiling case that I think you could even make for like guys like if you want to make like a really high offensive ceiling argument for like a Derek Queen and tell me why you'd take him much higher. Like I can wrap my head around that. I just don't see the Beringer like lottery thing. Like it doesn't quite compute to me yet. But I'm open to it. So like I said, a guy I've got to do a lot more work on. So somebody I'm very open to seeing. If you've got any more in the chat, get them off. We're going to be wrapping it up soon. It's crazy to think Sergio De La Rey could be the best Spanish prospect in this class. People like him. I just kind of don't buy the shot with him. I think it looks really funky, and I really don't like how he moves defensively. I think he's tall and he's got a lot of feel. And like in our No Sings group chat the other day, we were talking about it, and like Rutgers joked that like, yeah, like if you need a stash, like there's a guy. Like that's part of the appeal. Tall guy that you can stash with good feel. Like I understand that. I'm just not like crazy about him. Like I just don't see what's super functional. It feels a little like Leandro Balmero to me, as far as like, oh yeah, he's like tall and like he can dribble and like pass and stuff. And it's like, okay, but like what? He's not going to be a primary in the NBA. I don't know that he's going to shoot. I worry immensely about him defensively. Like I'm just not super into him. Thoughts on Derek Queen, what teams might fit his skill set at the best level? That's a guy I would love in Miami, San Antonio, those kind of places where like he's got a rim protector next to him, and it's a really good like fitness player development type environment. Sam Vecini did a great job in his piece, sort of outlining the pro Derek Queen case, as if Sam Vecini needs a pat on the back from me. I think making the case that like Derek Queen's made some like real body improvements. As somebody who watched Derek Queen when he was playing up on U17s as a 16-year-old, or high school sophomore, whatever the case may be, body wise, like this is gonna sound odd to people that like aren't from the Chicagoland area and aren't as old as me. Derek Queen reminded me a lot of a young Eddie Curry when I saw him, and I mean that like really complimentary as far as like guy with just like a hulking frame who moved super light on his feet. Eddie Curry was like peaking in high school when I was like a middle school kid. I remember like watching his games on like local TV, like when he was in the state tournament and stuff. They lost in the state tournament actually, but like that's what it reminded me of. Was like, wow, this guy's really big and he's super light on his feet, but like body wise, he just looks so much different than he did a year or two ago. That I think continuing to put him in a place where you give him the tools he needs to succeed, so he can just keep working like that, those are going to be the best fits for him. And with like those programs too, maybe they can, keep working on his shot, kind of see where that goes. Who is the best prospect on Auburn? To me, it's Chani Broom. Very, very, very big on Chani Broom. Just wrote about him last week. Go read the column on NoCeilingsNBA.com. Who is Chani Broom? One of my favorite things I've written this year. NBA Jam asks, is Traore trending up for you? Feels like Serif, Casparis, Traore are ranked too far apart without too much context. I have those guys ranked really far apart, and it's because I've seen Casparis make threes. I'm still very low on Nolan Traore. I worry immensely about guys that set the table that don't have scoring gravity. He does not have that yet. And if his role is going to kind of force him to be a primary, like I don't know what off-ball value I'm getting out of him. I don't know that he has the on-ball scoring juice to create that gravity. And I think defensively, he's going to be in for a world of hurt at the NBA level based on what I've seen. So Traore, like I just don't buy it. Like I hate to be negative Nancy over here. He's been better lately, but like every time I watch him, I'm still just like, all right, what is this in an NBA game? Like I'm just not totally in. Serif is interesting to me because I think with Serif, like there's enough pull-up scoring and like effort and hustle where like I feel like I'm a little bit more intrigued by it. But again, like I still just don't know that he can shoot. With Casper, it's like I know he can shoot. And I think he's worked really hard with like screen navigation and things like that. He does get hidden so much defensively that I don't quite know what to make of that as a whole, but super low block guy as well. But yeah, I'm interested in him. Hearing 90 of 128 of Casper's threes came from step backs was scary. Yeah, like that's something that he goes to a lot. It's a shot that he goes to a lot. I think part of it is like he is, for whatever reason, way more comfortable pulling up than operating off the catch, but he's still like 35% on catch and shoot threes. So he's taken 142 threes on the year, 96 are off the dribble, which is a lot. But that's also his role at Illinois. Like they just have him set everything up. So tough to make it that. I'd rather just like take the guy that I've seen at least make them and go from there. But yeah, I think that will do it for this episode of Draft Sickos. I appreciate everybody coming in with the questions and helping me get through this and being my co-host. The audience, you were the co-host this week and you were lovely. I want to talk for a little bit, so don't turn this off. If you're thinking about turning this off, don't do it. Don't do it. I got a big article coming out tomorrow about Ryan Kalkbrenner, who's like a really interesting player in a way that like is fundamentally unsexy, and I kind of wrote about it. So give that a listen. Oh my gosh, the sickness, the brain fog is getting me. Give that a read. Check that out, and then the NCAA tournament's coming up, which means your boy is going to do once again the NCAA tournament prospect preview, where I write about at least one player on every single team in the entire field for free. NoCeilingsNBA.com. Check that out when it comes, because I'm about to start working very hard on that. And it better be one of my most read columns of the year again, or else my wife will kill me. She will do it. I'm serious. So yeah, that's that. All right, that'll do it. I appreciate you guys tuning in on this solo episode. I appreciate you all asking the questions. I'm going to go tend to the rest of my sick family. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all for tuning in. NoCeilingsNB.com. Follow me at Boundboards on XD Everything app and Blue Sky. Read my column tomorrow. Have a great week. I will see you all. Remember, next week, Steven's here. I'm not. I will be traveling. So I will see you all in 2 weeks. Thank you for your time as always. Have a good one.